Okay, weekend special. So the weekend special is a chance for me to try out new things, but I always try to limit the number of new ideas I'm trying out to just one or two. And I think it's because I'm the son of a scientist. So in the scientific method, you have to hold a bunch of variables constant while you're testing out each variable. You have to hold all the other ones constant, otherwise you don't know what works or doesn't work about what you're testing. So in that same frame of mind, if I were to just change everything, then I wouldn't necessarily know. Hi guys. I wouldn't necessarily know what about it was working better or worse than what I normally do. So for any given weekend special, sometimes I'm trying a completely new shape, like yesterday, just something that I wanted to try. Something that I think might be useful to other people and enter my product line. And sometimes I'm doing a form that's, familiar to me, like an eater here, and I'm trying a specific couple of things. In this case, with this eater, I want to try doing, I did some salad servers that had long facets, just a whole bunch of nice loose facets down the handle, and it felt amazing when you held it like this. And so I wanted to try that on the back side of the handle and keep the top side flat, I think. We'll see. It'll either be flat or it'll be slightly concave. So that's the goal with this eater here. And then everything else I'm trying to sort of keep as similar to what I normally do as possible. And that's how stuff evolves. But in the meantime, I'm happy to talk about whatever. So if anyone has any general questions or anything, give a shout out. I'm trying to got a big day ahead of me. Not a big day, a big week. This is my to-do list for the week. And at the end of it, I'm packing for the Spoonosaurus gathering at Matt White's house up in New Hampshire. So there's a bunch of things I need to do in terms of orders to fill and administrative things to do, and I'm also trying to prepare for the Spoonosaurus gathering. I'm gonna make some signs, gonna pack stuff, and I'm also trying to prepare for my first big workshop of the year at the Adirondack Folk School the weekend afterwards. I have some stumps that I need to put legs on, and I need to make some more clubs. And I need to prepare some of the axes that I have and get them ready for use. So it's and today what I'm doing after I do this is I'm gonna prepare a special rack for my truck. That's like it'll sort of be like the sapling frame for my hoop house, and it'll allow me, I won't drive around with it on, but it'll allow me to just slip a tarp over it and make it easier to make it more comfortable for me to camp out in my truck, because that's what I'll be doing at Matt's place and at the Adirondack Folk School. I'll just be camping in my truck bed, but I don't have a cap or anything like that. So this is a simple way to make a cap. I hope. I'm looking forward to working with saplings again. It's always fun to make these bent sapling structures. So I just did a Spoonosaurus thing, talking about how to handle a twist in your spoon blank like this, where basically if you treat this as the level that you want, first of all, by tilting it, it actually cocks the handle off to one side in terms of being level. You can see how this is straight in line with the bowl. And as soon as I do this, the handle cocks off that side. But the other problem of treating the bowl as the thing that you leave straight is that it means that all four planes of this handle are now cocked to the side also, which means that to straighten that out, you'd have to adjust all four. Much simpler is simply to make sure that you have enough meat on the, and by meat I mean width here, the high side, and then lower this rim down when you're carving the top face of the bowl there. So yeah, so it's gonna be a big week for me, getting all prepared for all of these events, which I've known were coming, but you know how it is. Sort of halfway prepare, and then there's always a mad dash at the end to get everything ready to actually go. And I'm excited about teaching these workshops at Adirondack Folk School. I'm going to be teaching 3 spoon carving workshops there, so that if if you're interested in doing it, it's out near Lake Lucerne, just southwest of Lake George. And the idea of doing 3 dates at various times is that people could find one that would fit them. But it's exciting for me to do a multiple day workshop. When I teach lessons at home, they're mostly 4, sometimes we go over 5-hour lessons. And you can cover everything, but it's at a fast pace. It's at a pace where I'm sort of keeping us moving along at a clip to be able to cover everything, so that people go home with all of the skills needed to be safe and try things on their own. And with a workshop, I'm trying to wrap my head around how to back off and essentially give people space to experiment and just get into that zone of carving. So I want to give people, I think it'll probably mean doing things in a different order, and it will, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. But at any rate, I think it'll be a really nice pace. I've only done 1 2-day workshop before, and I remember it being very relaxed, which was really nice. Okay, so now I've carved my outline, basically. You can see it needs a little more taken off here, which I'll do. And then before I do anything else, I'm going to reduce the rim on that high side. Actually, that's not true. While it's tempting to think, oh, I'll reduce the rim on the high side, actually what you should do in this situation is carve the low side first, so you know exactly how far down it's going to be, and then you match it on the high side. And that way you don't dither back and forth trying to get them matched up. So there we go. Do the low side. So the new puppy is settling in nicely. She's starting to learn the commands that we use. We keep them to a minimum, no tricks or anything, but we do think it's important for dogs to come and to sit and to get off of things and to hop into things, and so it's all that sort of thing. My sister, when we got our first dogs, was very disappointed that I didn't teach my dogs any tricks, and she was always trying to get them to do things, and my dogs would always look at her like, what are you trying to get me to do? Because they were just used to sort of interacting with us without being told what to do a lot. The expectations were created, and then they sort of followed them. So now you can see I'm pulling down this high side here. Yeah, there we go. So there's this feature that the live videos have that you can request to be a part of the live video, which I'm not granting to people even when they request it, because it means that we split the screen, and which just makes it harder for me to see your comments, and then everyone would see you as well. But it does make me think that it would be fun to do that, like with Matt, and do a Spoonosaurus video together with Matt where we both have the screen and talk about whatever it is that we're talking about. We'll have to figure that out. Okay, so now let's talk about crank for a second, as long as I'm making this educational. So see how the rim of the bowl here has a very slight curve to it. I'm not talking about the curve from here to here, but instead the curve from here to here. Very slight curve. And the reason for that curve is that when you pull the spoon out of your mouth, if it's completely flat across, it'll lift up your lip here and here. It feels very uncomfortable. So you need a little curve there, but you need just a little curve. And I like to keep that curve separate from whatever's happening with the crank. Now, I might not keep this, but I might. But either way, I keep whatever's happening with this curve here separate from what's happening from the rim here. And that way I can have a bowl that actually holds a certain amount of liquid. Because otherwise, if you put too much of a swoop in the bowl, then it reduces how much the bowl can actually hold. It dribbles out the side, essentially. So I always keep my rim swoop pretty minimal. What was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, and so the way I do that is within the cranked in, chopped in bit at the top of the log face, right here, right about here, so just a tiny bit up from the neck, is my lowest point. So basically the entire bowl is on this angled part, and then the entire handle is on this angled part. And I don't go down and then have the bowl sort of be half in one and half in the other. The bowl is tilted one way, handle's tilted the other way. And that has several benefits. One is it makes it real clear what needs to happen in terms of the handle angle versus the bowl angle. And it separates out what needs to happen with the rim of the bowl from what needs to happen in terms of achieving the crank, which can be confusing for people at first. But it also means that when I'm carving the rim of the bowl, instead of getting stuck down in this valley here, if I only have a slight swoop and the whole thing is within a tilted piece of wood, if the whole thing is tilted within the piece of wood, then what it allows me to do is carve all the way from here around and start coming up the neck before I get to that grain change. So the grain change happens right here, and it's much easier to resolve that grain change when it's right here than when you have it down here in the lowest point of the rim. So I would recommend, instead of putting your crank right here, put your crank here and make sure that the bowl is tilted up nicely within the grain of the wood so that it's really clear that you're going to carve this entire length in one go. All right, so looking at it from the end, I can see that I do need to bring down this upper bit more. So that's what I'm going to continue doing. Does anybody have any questions about what I just described? And we'll try and make this more interactive. Okay. Okay. That's pretty good. And I don't try and get a super clean outline at this stage. I'm mostly just trying to get it within a certain rough parameter. And then once I get to the stage where I redraw the form, that's when I then go for nice clean curving lines. But right now, it's just about making sure that I leave enough material at various points that I have what I need. But then it's about getting those edges down to a thickness where I can easily make clean cuts on them. All right, probably do a thumb flip on the back. It's easy to do a thumb flip on the back because you pull it in. Great, Nadia, I'm glad. You'd like to try it. Yeah, getting sucked into those valleys that's the thing, because then you go back and forth trying to get it cleaned up, and before you know it, you've gone deeper than you want. And it's also just very hard to resolve there. You'll find it much easier to resolve up here at the neck, partly about how it's you're curving in a different plane, and so the knife it can come out of it more easily. All right, so this grain is doing beautifully at carving down here, so we're definitely going to have a nice flat top. And then because this is a weekend special, if I'm trying something new, if I'm trying to do facets on the back, then I need to leave myself more weight in the back than I otherwise would, because if I just carve down so that it looks exactly how I want it to when viewed from the side and you ignore the facets, how does that work? Then I won't leave myself enough on the edges to actually bring in the bevel of the facet. So I'm going to be a little conservative about how much I leave here, and give myself a little extra to mess around with, since the whole point of this is to mess around. I have to say I really enjoy doing the weekend specials, because while I prefer the psychology of carving things to order, if I didn't do the weekend specials, then I would eventually reach some point where I would feel like I was sort of stuck doing the same thing over and over again and had no way, I couldn't justify spending the time carving something new and different because I have all these orders waiting. And so having the discipline of the weekend, of saying, okay, on the weekend I always carve something different and it's just up for grabs, is not, I don't have the pressure of fulfilling an existing commitment. It gives me the space to try stuff, and that helps keep things fresh. So you can see I left myself a little more weight in the back than I perhaps would. And now I'm gonna pull the back of the bowl up. You can see almost all my cuts are thumb pushes, but it's not actually about holding this steady and moving my thumb. Instead, it's almost like holding my thumb steady and pulling my fingers back like this. So it's not about, it has the same effect, but it's not about holding this still and then pushing with my thumb. It's actually holding my thumb still on this and then moving the wood against the knife that is held still. So that's a pretty fundamental difference. And the nice thing about it is that as you get close to this back point here, right, where you're fully extended, you can actually exert tremendous pressure and a great deal of control, because everything's kind of locked in and still. So when you reach the end of that cut, you can have tremendous power to do little cuts like that. But it's not about pushing with your thumb. It's about pulling back with all of these muscles here. And it keeps you from getting fatigued. And what I'd recommend for people when they start doing it is don't try and dig in at all. Just do this. Just practice doing this until you can, the holding hand basically does all of the work. The hand holding the knife does almost nothing. The hand holding the knife articulates which way the edge is pointing, and maybe if it's dropping or tilting like this, but really all of the power is coming from this motion of closing my fingers, and to some extent also sort of dropping my hand like this. So I would just recommend you just rest your knife on it. Don't let it dig in at all, but just practice going like this. And that will get you the sense of how to do it. And then you can use it to do, nice, long, controlled facets, just like that. And the reason this is so safe is that the hand holding the knife doesn't have any force behind it. So if it pops out before you thought it was going to, there's no force behind the knife. It's not going to travel any further than just popping out like this. So I don't let my kids walk around me while I'm carving, but it does make it a lot safer under those circumstances. And that's a big part of why I do it, that it's just safer. But it also gives me a lot more power and control. And you can see I can do, this entire plane here and one cut here and one cut here. And that allows me to get nice lines really quickly. And I would say that this is not just a back of the bowl sort of thing. This is any cut, except for situations where you'd want to brace it against your chest. Basically, I'm doing the same pull back with my pull back with my hand. It's funny, we call it a thumb push, but it's not really pushing with your thumb. At least not the way I do it. I guess there are some situations where I am pushing a little bit, but it's always accompanied with a scrunching of my hand at the same time. Am I talking loud enough? Can you guys hear me? Okay, so pulling in the back of the handle. So I want to reduce this rim even more so that I can get a nice clean line, nice clean curve around it. And you can see that I have plenty of thickness at the neck to bring in as I want. And part of the reason I left it so thick at the neck is that in this particular instance, I sawed through narrower in the back than I did in the front. And so I wanted to leave as much weight here as necessary and then only reduce it at the end once I could accurately judge how strong this was so that I didn't make it too weak. I mean, this is not weak at all. I don't think I could break this with my hand. So I want to just make sure that I keep it that way. I could probably reduce this down to about 2/3 of what it is now, and that would be good. But that all depends on how narrow this is here, and how narrow this is here depends on how wide, how deep this is here. So everything's playing off of each other, and I want to leave this as fat as is reasonable until the end so that everything else can sort of, all the dust can settle, and I make sure that I don't end up with not enough material for a nice strong neck. Hi, Matt. Hey, Matt, I got a first aid kit for the Spoonosaurus gathering. We're all set there. I'm going to carve this, I'm going to paint the signs for the parking and directions this afternoon. So I know we've harped on it a bunch, but in case anyone doesn't know, Matt and I are hosting a free spoon carving gathering this coming weekend. So next Saturday and Sunday at his house in Temple, New Hampshire, which is in southern New Hampshire, right close to the Massachusetts border. It's bring your own food, come prepared to camp or go to a hotel at the end of the night. And generally sort of be outside kind of situation rather than a be in the house situation. But I'll be doing a full spoon carving demonstration both days. I believe at 2 o'clock is what we advertised. And other than that, it's just going to be a hangout and carve and get to know each other and just generally have a good time and make connections. So if anyone is interested in coming and hasn't heard about it up until now, feel free to be in touch with me if you have sort of basic questions, and with Matt if you have logistical questions, because it's his house that it's happening at. Right. Hey, you got a wood stove in the shop. Very nice. Very nice. All right, cool. So now I have the rim pulled up thin enough. And basically I have the amount of crank that I want. Now, hold on. I'm gonna sheathe my knife. Always sheathe your knife, even if you're putting it down just for a minute. Now, with this dolphin hump, it exaggerates the crank. It makes it look like it's diving in a little more, but I always think of this amount of crank, you know, if you just draw 2 lines, about like that as being ideal, because really all you want is to come down, be able to get into a bowl of soup and keep your hand up out of the bowl rim. This piece is, I mean, it's drying as we talk. It's from a cherry log that came down a year ago. I bucked it up maybe 2 weeks ago, and then it was split apart into smaller pieces a couple days ago. But cherry, especially cherry heartwood like this, dries out in front of your eyes. So there's still moisture in it as I make each one of these cuts, but then it dries out real quick. Okay, so at this stage, I'm going to do my little freshening up the drawing. I'm going to sharpen my pencil first. I had a captain on a schooner tell me that he worked at a boatyard once, And the very first thing his boss at the boatyard did was he said, "Show me your pencil." And he assigned him work based on the fineness of his pencil, as he kept it just sort of every day in his pocket. And so if you kept your pencil tip very fine, that was a sign that you should be given detailed work. And if your pencil tip was terrible, you should be given, the broad strokes work. So my pencil tip looks about like that. So I'm going to sharpen it up. But that's an accurate assessment of my character. I am not despite carving spoons, I'm definitely a broad strokes kind of person. Okay. I've talked about this before. I almost always carve my my spoons with the bowl. Draw my spoons on the blank initially with the bowl facing up. That's just how it makes sense to me. I draw an egg, and then I draw the line in the middle, and then I draw the handle. When I get to this stage, I like to flip it over because you notice stuff with it flipped over that you wouldn't notice with it this way. So just turning it around will give you a sense of, oh, I didn't see that in the other orientation. And for me, one of the first things I want to make sure of is that the handle is lined up nicely with the bowl, which in this case it is. And then I'll probably, if I'm planning on bringing my handle in equally from either side, I might mark it on either side, just like that, right there and over there, so that it's clear where I want to do that, and then I'll build out the shoulders from there. And I when I said that I looked at it from the other direction, that doesn't mean that I draw the shape now from the other direction. I actually draw this shape. I'm turning it around. I'm looking at it from all different angles and making sure that it's as good as it can be when I look at it from every angle, not just one side or the other. Now, one thing I feel like I have to work against, and I think it's probably pretty common with all spoon carvers, is there is a tendency for the tip of your spoon bowl to get narrower and narrower as you are chasing symmetry. And that's because you push the line in and you might get it to look symmetrical, but all of a sudden your spoon tip gets narrower, and pretty soon you're ended up with a triangular bowl, even if that's not what you were going for at first. So I always find that at this stage I want to work really hard to make sure I'm not ending up with a triangular bowl. And even if that means reducing the length of my spoon bowl a little bit, I always find that the spoons themselves are better off for it if I can keep it from being triangular. So having said that, having held it up to the camera, I can see that this is not quite a nice curve here. There we go. Rather than erase it, which here I'm doing, I often just draw a darker line when I adjust the line. Okay. And then to truly see what it might look like when I remove all the other wood, sometimes I squint, and there's something about squinting. If you squint just the right amount, you can really see the lines that you drew with fewer distractions. You also look kind of silly. And then handle length varies for me. I'm sorry, handle width varies for me, but I'd say there's also a sweet spot where if it gets too narrow, it feels too narrow, and if it gets too wide, it feels too wide. And right in the middle is this amorphous middle ground where it feels just right. And that figuring out where that is and being able to reliably see that is one of the things that you develop over time of doing it again and again and again. I just read an interesting blog that I'd never seen before. A fella down in Alabama. I occasionally search around for new spoon carving blogs, and there aren't that many of them. But a fellow from Alabama wrote an interesting blog about his love-hate relationship with spoon templates and how while he likes not having to use templates, that the reason he does when he's selling his work at farmers markets and stuff is that there's just a fraction of an inch difference can make a huge difference in terms of you hold it up against a window, same effect as squinting. Oh yeah, I think that's a good idea. So his point was that a fraction of an inch makes a huge difference in terms of the functionality of the spoon, both in all of its dimensions. And I think he's right. I think there's certainly play, and it's a matter of proportions, but it's shocking how small the amounts are that you sometimes take off that make a huge difference. Okay. So at this point, I've got the symmetry I want. I've cleaned up the lines. I'm going to carve around it again. And somewhere along the way, I'll switch from this knife, which has a more aggressive edge, to one of my other knives that has a finer tip. And that will allow me to clean up the neck here just a little bit better. But for now, I want that aggressive edge to help me get clean lines around the rim. So again, I'm doing that thumb push, or should we call it a hand squeeze cut. And essentially using it to carry up and around. And you can see how easily I'm carving through that end grain. And a big part of why I'm carving through that end grain so easily is that it's very, very thin. I'm not trying to carve through. If I was trying to carve through twice that thickness, it would be twice as hard. So being able to get yourself within a certain tolerance of the finished dimension and not over it, but sort of within that place, is the easiest way to efficiently carve, because you haven't removed so much material that you've done too much, but you're getting yourself to the place where each subsequent cut is as easy as it can be on your body, and just to sort of to make successfully. So that's, I think, what people mean when they say systematic removal of material. Something that I know Jared talks about a lot is just, I think it's the systematic removal of material down to certain tolerances, such that the cuts that come after that point are just easier than they would be had you not done it. Okay, good. Now, okay, good. Okay, so now, one of the reasons I like straight handles, one is the simplicity of their lines, but the other is the simplicity of getting a nice, sweet, or slightly curving line down the side of the handle like this. It's just something very pleasing about being able to do that. Now, sometimes, depending on whether it's thinner back here than it is up here, you need to start off at 90 degrees, and then as you get closer, actually tilt the knife so that you end up more like this, that if you guys can see the angle there. So you do need to be aware of that, and it's the challenge then is to tilt the handle over while simultaneously maintaining the top edge of the knife on the marked line that you want. And then when you do it on the back side, it's paying attention to the opposite, to where the heel of the knife is, and making sure that that's performing a straight line, but at the same time angling the tip of the knife in more so that it cuts into a narrower back than you have in the front. There are some spoons where I carve the front narrower than the back. I've done that on some cooking spoons. It can be quite lovely because you end up with a spoon that looks delicate but yet has enough material back here for you to really hold on to nicely. But for eating spoons, they tend to be wider in the top than in the bottom. I probably have made some that have done the other, but all right. So right here is where I'm going to switch knives from this one that has an aggressive edge, but because of that aggressive edge, the tip is just slightly wider. And I'm going to switch to one of my other ones, which has the standard Moore grind that hasn't been altered, and therefore the tip is just, it's narrower at the very tip. And so I'm going to use that to come across the shoulder and out the neck, just like that. And you want to make sure you're doing this with a knife that is nicely sharpened, because otherwise it won't be able to do this successfully. Just making sure that, good. So that's one side done, just like that. And now, coming in from the other side. I usually try and do a first cut that gets those big bits out of there, and then I can see what I'm doing more easily. Because you should be able, with a sharp enough knife, to ghost up against the grain if it's fairly lined up with the grain. And so you don't need to have those big pieces there forever. Now, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you end up with a little bit like that right there at my finger. And in this instance, rather than keep beating my head against the wall, I'm going to use a thumb push, very controlled thumb push, to come in and just right up to that line. And either see if I can remove it so that it's clean, or, and that's what happened in this case, do another little push down the neck so that now it's attached going this way, and now I'm going to come at it again from this way. Hi, Joseph. So, trying to clean that up. There we go. Got it. Good. And there you have the other side all cleaned up. So, now I've achieved symmetry. I've got the neck cleaned up on both sides. I've got the top face cleaned up. I've got the sides cleaned up. Remember, I left myself some meat on the back here so that I can do, hey Tom, so that I can do some facets, because that's what I want to explore with this weekend special is a more faceted underside of the handle, similar to what Tom does actually. And what I need to do now is, now that I have carved this edge, because I left this middle bit chunky up here, it actually changed the rim just slightly, so that's not as sweet a curve. So I need to go back and carve that rim down. So this is one cut that I use. You can also carve this like this by coming down like this, and then around, and tuck your elbow in so that you can't stab yourself by accident. But if your elbow's tucked in, you can come around the bottom, essentially, just like that. And that works fine. But sometimes I find that it's helpful to do this sort of funny knife pivot cut at the tip, particularly. That's right, Joseph. Yeah, it must be the end of the day for you. Or maybe just afternoon. I don't know what the difference is between here and Austria. So I'm basically, I'm holding it like this, I'm pinning it here, and then I'm using this as a pivot, and then I'm just pivoting the tip of the knife, and that allows me to be able to really see the curve that I'm trying to carve as I'm carving it, and have a lot of control. And then I can stop right there when I get close to my fingers, and then either come in with another pivot here, which is what I usually do, or come in at that point with this cut here on the side. Late afternoon, yeah, 16 hours. Oh, it's 1600. How interesting. We just had daylight savings time here as well, which meant that I got up at 5 o'clock, what felt like 5 o'clock to me, to work on my book, and it was 6 o'clock automatically. But thankfully, no one told the kids that, so they slept in an hour later. So now I'm doing the same thing to this side here. Derek's method of hollowing with a hook, with a thumb pivot. I can't say I have, Tom. I did get to watch him do his hollowing at Pat's Spoon Gathering last August, but I can't say I saw a method that I then tried and acquired as part of what I do. I'd be interested in seeing it though, if you ever want to demonstrate it. But give me a heads up that you're demonstrating it, because I often don't have time to watch all the way through your videos, but I like to check in on them. Tom, you should really do more short videos as part of your Instagram feed. That would be a perfect thing to put in your Instagram feed itself, not as a live stories or anything, but just be like different techniques like that you do. That would be awesome. Okay, so I'm trying to. What was I doing there? I'm trying to explain everything I was doing. So basically, I just saw that there wasn't quite the symmetry that I wanted once I had recarved the top edge of the rim. I'll need a righty to describe doing it. Yeah, so it looks like a lefty for me. I'll figure it out. I'm good at adapting the world. Okay, so now I'm gonna pull up the back and pull that bottom edge up to where I want it to be. Now this is where having some experience and knowing what the depth should be from this lowest point to the lowest point of your rim should be, because if you make it too, yeah, daily tip would be good. If you make it too shallow, then your bowl just won't have any depth to it. So while I am a big advocate of carving the spoon, the outside of the spoon all the way to done, and then carving the bowl last, there are times when I'll carve the outside of the bowl mostly there, and then carve the bowl, and then go back and carve the outside of the bowl. If I'm unclear of exactly how big the bowl should be, then that's what I'll do. And you gain that clarity just by doing it a bunch. So I know how much depth to leave there and what it should feel like in my hand for to be an eater that's the size that I want it to be what I like. But again, if you don't have that clarity over how deep to make it, well, then do the best you can. I would say, get it as close as you can, and then do the bowl, and then you can always come back and thin down the back of the bowl. As long as keep telling yourself that you're gonna walk away at a certain point, because it's easy to get sucked into a spoon and just keep going back and back and back to all the little things that you wished were perfect, and then hours have gone by and you probably made your spoon possibly too thin when it would have been imperfect but a perfectly good spoon back when you started trying to make it perfect. Okay, so I'm doing the sides of the shoulders here, and also pulling up the rim as I do it. I usually start at the rim and work my way into the center for this part. You don't hollow like Derek, you just I had tried. No, I can't say I've tried it. Does he hold the knife does he hold the spoon knife like this, where he's basically holding it like this and twisting his wrist and then guiding it with the back of his fingers? Or pivoting in that case? Because I do a lot of pivoting, but it's all like very pushed down into the bowl. We'll get to that in a minute here. So yeah, when I'm initially roughing out the spoon, I tend to start in the middle and then do a broad facet on either side to maintain symmetry. But now when I'm doing sort of what it will ultimately be the final underside surface of the bowl, I tend to start at the outside and work my way back into the middle. And that way the outside gets the rim just the way I want it, and it keeps me from over flattening the middle of the bowl. If I started in the middle for my finishing cuts and then worked my way out, chances are I would overcut in the middle. And so this process allows me much more control over how much depth the bowl can have. And again, it's not the end of the world if I end up with more depth than I need once I've cut the bowl, the inside bowl. I can always go back and flatten it out later, but you can't put material back on the spoon. So okay, so now I've got my top rim, my bottom rim, this face here. That about the way I want it. And so now I've reached that point where I get to start messing around with the facets on the back of the handle, which is what I wanted to explore with the weekend special in general. How many spoon knives do I have? Joseph, do you mean hook knives or do you mean like straight knives? So I'm just cleaning up the side of the handle, just trying to get everything squared away before I proceed, because essentially I want to be able to leave these as finished surfaces if I need to. I'm also not shy about going back to them, but I'd like to, at this stage, treat every surface as a potential finished surface. You mean hook knives? Hold on, Joseph. I'm going to read this comment from Tom. No, he thumb pushes the hook's pivots on his thumb. Oh, yeah, the thing he does where he uses the thing where he essentially uses the opposite style hook, but in his dominant hand, to essentially push and pivot like that. No, I never tried that. I do have some righty hooks that I use for teaching, so I could try that, but I just find that I do everything I want to with the one knife. So that gets to your question, Joseph. I just have, I have two of Matt's monadnocks, but that's just because he gave me two at various points. It's actually not true. I think I bought both of these. No, one he gave me and one I bought. But I tend to just use the one. And the second one is a backup in case something happens to the other one, or it's a little too dull because it's the end of the week and I need to keep working. I don't want to stop. And I find that I can do everything I want to do with just those two. So now, before I'm going on, I'm just going to do a little more trimming up on this side of the bowl here. You see how it's just a little too high. That the only reason you asked was because I mentioned about shaping the rim with the thumb push. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It'd be interesting to watch Derek do it. I wonder, back when I started carving spoons, the puppy's still asleep. Back when I started carving spoons, I had somebody. I was working on a sailing ship at the time, and somebody said, "Oh, you need a spoon knife. We can just make you a spoon knife." And we took a little Chicago cutlery paring knife and took it to an anvil and just bent it. Sort of like how Barn had that video recently about making a bent Sloyd knife. Now, I didn't know anything about Sloyd knives or Sloyd bevels or anything like that, so those knives weren't useful in that way. But I did make a left and a right-handed version of that, Tom, because I didn't understand how you would just use one. I thought that there would be spaces where you needed one that could go one direction and one that could go the other direction. And in fact, I was so confused about sort of which direction I should get that when I ordered my first hook knife from Robin and he sent me a lefty, I wrote to him and said, I think you sent me the wrong one. Because I just didn't have it in my head how you would hold it and use it. I actually had it in my head the exact opposite. I had it in my head that I'd be using it the way that you described Derek doing that cut. So yeah, I think that's the way that sort of intuitively makes sense to people who've never seen it in action. And I'm sure it has certain situations, like I've heard when you're working with burl, that it can be really helpful because in burl, the grain swirls around every which way, and sometimes having that knife that goes the other direction just allows you to make a cut from a direction that doesn't aggravate the grain, and that can get you out of sticky situations. But I don't really ever carve burl, so it's never tried it. Okay, so now lines are sweeter, and Joseph, the only other thing about the hook knives is Matt is, in theory, sending me a couple of his newer style hook knives to try out and get feedback on. Or I guess I'm going to just have them at the spoon gathering. So I'm interested to see if, something that we had been talking about, if there was a gentler curve, could I get an even cleaner finish on the inside of a large bowl, for instance. And then there was even a sort of a weird shape that I really wanted Matt to try, and he started it and thought it looked so weird that he didn't want to continue. But I think it really could be cool. So I begged him to continue finishing the one that he'd started. So we'll see about that. And then I did buy, at one point, I was able to get my hands on a large Tuka cam from Nick Westerman. But right now, I don't have a place where all my tools live that aren't in my toolbox. I guess everything lives out in the greenhouse. But someday when I have a shop and can hang the Tuka cam on the wall and have it be available, the thought was it would essentially allow me to do the same thing as an a more open curve, that it would give me, I could use it at the end of spoon carving to get an even better finish more easily on the inside of bowls. But because of how I sort of want everything to fit into the toolbox that then gets moved around the house a bunch, it doesn't work for me to have a really long-handled Tuka cam that sort of has no place to live. So I haven't really taught myself how to use it yet. And honestly, another part of why I haven't taught myself how to use it is that there's a learning curve that goes with any new tool. And it can be daunting to take a process that you really feel like you understand, and then to add a new skill that you're trying to learn on top of it. That is a daunting thing, and it's it's something to be wary of as any maker, of getting sort of stuck doing only one thing because you've gotten so good at it that you worry about trying something new. I'm certainly guilty of that, but it's something that I'm at least aware of. So, all right, so now I'm going to start these facets coming down. Coming down the sides here. And because I want, in my head, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a nice gentle curve of facets going over like this. I want to do these first ones on the side quite steep. Not like 45 degrees, more like, I don't know, quite steep. That the knife is, I don't know how to describe it. The knife is like this, so quite steep, not like that, but like this. And that will give me room to sort of radiate the other facets. And I'm also pushing this facet to be a little wider than it will ultimately end up, because the side of this facet that is on the inside of the handle is going to be nipped off by the next facet that comes along. So if I just made it the width that I wanted it to be in the end, it would end up smaller, if that makes sense. Okay, then I can keep checking on the back to make sure that the facets are the way I want them. So now I've got 2, and now I'm going to do more. So as I do more, there's a pinch point here at the narrowest point where everything comes in to this pinch point here, and then everything needs to flow out from that. So I'll probably just start at the pinch point, start with pretty narrow, and then widen it out as soon as I can to try and match the width. of the one below it. Now, have to be a little careful. There we go. Because of the tail flip on this spoon here, it's just hard to get it all the way in that one pull. So I have to switch at a certain point. And we come from the other direction. Now, if I do this carefully enough, but also sort of swiftly enough, I'll end up with nice looking facets the very first time around, and it will keep the process really simple. I'm not going for perfect facets. I'm going for, really going for how it feels. And you can see it's nicely rounded now. So now I have, yeah, it's actually pretty good. All right, I'll leave that there. There we go. That's the facets on the other side. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Now I'm just going to trim the curve here at the top. I used to spend so much time trying to get this curve perfect. And I think now I do get them pretty perfect. But this is a great example of a motion that just takes time doing again and again to get right. Because going from this direction and going from this direction are just shockingly different. And so you got to go at it from, you got to sort of apply different amounts of pressure from each direction. Otherwise you end up with a lopsided curve. And that's what happened to me over and over again. So now I've got my facets on the back. We've got quite hard edges here, and I have to decide if I'm going to do a thumb groove. Then I will probably do no one's called dibs yet, but I'm sorry. I thought a lot about this. It's never happened yet, but I don't think I'm going to let anyone call dibs until I put it up, and then it can be a free for all. So it all has to do with how it feels. I think this has enough of a tail flip here that I'm not going to put a thumb groove in this top face, by which I mean use the spoon knife to make a slightly concave surface, because if I did that, it would have the effect of increasing the perceived tail flip that is there. Yes, sorry there. It's just the way it is. And good luck to you. Appreciate the thought. So in this instance, I'm not going to do that. And so I'll probably just draw down sort of medium size chamfers on the edge. I've experimented with doing tiny chamfers, doing large chamfers. There is a middle ground that I think is, it looks really sharp in a photograph because it looks clean and kind of minimal, which I like that aesthetic. And if you go much bigger than that, it looks like it just doesn't look as clean to my eye. And if you go less than that, then it's not apparent enough, and you actually don't appreciate that there's a chamfer there, and it doesn't pop out in a photograph as well. So there's sort of a middle ground that I've gravitated towards, and which explains why my bevels are the width that they are. That it's a funny combination of how it looks and how it comes across in a photograph. Trying to hit the sweet spot between those two. So once I carve that bevel on the curved bit here, I then recarve the top to make it match, because a lot of times you'll carve this bevel and then the undercurve, the curve that's on the underside won't match the top one, so you got to go back and carve the top one here. I apparently have 30 seconds remaining, guys, so I'm going to not save this one as a story, but I will save it just long enough to then put it up on my YouTube channel. So it'll probably be 3 or 4 minutes before I'm back up, and I'll go through making the bowl of this one, and then that one will stay up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you on the other side.